Hello, wonderful people. This is Tom Check with Choice Coaching, where we help you unlock your inner awesomeness. And today we are talking about a topic that I think is really, really interesting. It is the communication cycle. And this is maybe a little different than some of the topics we cover on a regular basis. Often we focus very inwardly on your personal experience. And today we're branching out. We're looking at how you interact with others and how you communicate with others. And there's a really interesting way to look at communication. And I'm going to go through kind of the loop that happens and just follow along with me. So let's say I'm talking to a friend of mine. I have a thought that comes up in my head. And my brain does a really amazing job of very quickly figuring out how to take that thought and turn it into words. And so I say something. And I say something that I think encompasses the thought and all the emotions and all the stuff that goes along with that thought. I try and communicate, and I try and condense it down so that it's understandable to the other person. And then they receive that verbalization, right? They hear it in their ears, and they have to translate it into a thought on their part. And they do this through a totally different lens than you do, because they've had a totally different set of life experiences. They have a different disposition. They have different rules or assumptions about how the world works than you do. And so they take that verbalization that you gave them and they kind of retranslate it and have a thought in their head. And then what happens? They have a thought about how to respond based on how they received your thought and what they think it means. So then they take this crazy big thought that has all of this connotation and context, and they condense it down into a response that's verbalized back to you. And you receive it and you pass it through this internal filter that you have of all of your life experiences, your assumptions of how the world works, your emotions that day, the environment that you're in. And oftentimes, we go through this multiple times, over and over and over and over again. We'll sit and we'll talk with somebody for an hour, and we forget that the language I'm using to compress all of that thought into a verbalization might not re-expand to the same thought on their side. And that's honestly the joy of communication, is that I'm not talking to a clone of myself. They respond differently than I do. But it's also one of the biggest challenges of communication, because we often rush through communicating and we assume that the other person understands what we meant beyond just what we said. And so when we consider what a miscommunication is, it's when something in between or something in this cycle gets garbled. It's like if you want to know how to say something in Spanish and you type it into Google and it's a sentence. And Google gives you back a sentence of how to say it in Spanish. And then you immediately take that sentence and put it back into Google for how to say that Spanish sentence into English. And you get back something close, but often something that doesn't exactly make sense in English. And we do this every time we interact with somebody, and we forget that it's happening. And then we wonder why we miscommunicated. So what do we do when this happens? What do we do when communication and this cycle get misaligned, right? And they're not passing back and forth, and we're maybe not actually on the same page because of those wonderful filters that each of us has that makes us an individual. The first step is to have some communication tools in your toolbox for what to do when it happens. And these are fairly simple. Oftentimes, repeating back what you believe the other person meant and asking them if you're right is an incredibly eye-opening thing to do. And some part of you thinks it's going to be awkward and that they're going to be like, why are you asking this? But most of the time, they're not. Most of the time, they are either going to nod their head and say yes, exactly, and feel really heard, which is beautiful in and of itself. Or if the message was miscommunicated, then they'll shake their head no, and they'll go, kind of, no, not really, but I meant this other thing. Do you get it now? And when we take the time to slow down the communication and give these reflections, as they are often called, these same page kind of like check-ins, what we identify is that oftentimes we totally are misunderstanding the person we're talking to. And that's great, because then we can get back on the same page and we can actually communicate effectively. So my invitation to you today is to take some time in a conversation with somebody to recognize that what you think they understand by your verbalization is not probably what they understand. And it's your job to find out. It's your job to ask some follow-up questions, to reflect what they said to you, to make sure that you understand what they're trying to say. See what happens. My guess is you'll have one of the better conversations of your day. But find out. Go have a conversation. And until next time, keep up the awesome work of making your world a better place.